folder for ECS Online. Select all the drivers and click Open. This will bring those driver files into the Driver Manager. To filter this list, let's search for Samsung. Sort by model, then add the UF80DX to the serial port by double-clicking it. Let's simplify the driver name, which makes it easier to identify during configuration. Double-click the name and change it to DocCam. For serial port 2, we'll add a driver for our projector. In the search field, type Canon, sort by model, then add the emulated Canon video projector and change the name to Projector. Any changes required for the serial devices are made in the Serial Settings area. Communication settings, such as the baud rate and data bits, are available, along with parameters and properties directly related to the driver in use. The Blu-ray is controlled via IR, so we'll select the IR serial port number 1 and ensure that we are in IR mode. For this tutorial, we'll add the Panasonic driver for the BDT220p and then change the name to Blu-ray. Notice that we can have 2 IR drivers per port by adding a second driver. The names and descriptions of each command are displayed in the Properties pane on the right, where they can be renamed. Next, we need to add the driver for our annotator located on Ethernet port 1. Type Anno in the search field. Select the appropriate annotator driver, then rename it to Annotator. Communication settings for the annotator can be made under Ethernet settings. Ethernet port 2 will control the matrix switcher. So let's add the Extron DTP crosspoint driver. To simplify the name, change it to DTP crosspoint. Also, be sure to set the IP address and TCP port. To make it easier to read as we go through our configuration, let's name the inputs and outputs for the DTP crosspoint. The center of the Ethernet pane lists all the commands available for this device. Click the matrix tie command. To the right, select Input in the Parameters pane so we can name these inputs to correspond to what we have in our diagram. On input number 1, we have the PC. Input 3, the Blu-ray. Input 4, the DocCam. Input 5 is the laptop. And 7 is the wall plate. For the output list, set our projector on 1. Now let's use these same naming conventions for the output tie status command. This helps when selecting the proper on and off states for our buttons. Another item to note in regards to Extron drivers is their ability to provide serial over Ethernet capabilities, where a device can be controlled without using additional COM ports on the processor. Next, on the configuration palette are the I/O ports. We have 2 relays in our system for controlling screen up and down. We'll need to rename them to correspond with their functionality. For Relay 1, just double-click and type Screen Up. For Relay 2, click the drop-down option to its right, select Rename, and change it to Screen Down. Let's continue to Schedules. In this area, events will be triggered to deploy at specific times and dates. Later in this lesson, we'll be setting a schedule to shut down our system. Monitors allows for actions to be triggered by status, feedback, or conditions that change values. For our system, we'll be setting a monitor for lamp hours that will be configured to send an email alert to the contact we created earlier. In the Macros section, we will set up our collection of multiple conditions and commands to be used as a single action in our configuration. In local variables, values can be defined to assist in tracking the status of a configuration. We'll get into more detail with variables as we configure our project. The last item, timers, is an area to define actions that take place when a countdown has expired or allows the user to execute functions with a shortcut key. We will not be using timers in our configuration. Now we are ready to add our touch panel. Go to the control processor in the top left pane and click the plus icon. Select Add Touch Link Panel. This pop-up allows us to select from a number of control interfaces and touch panels from the drop-down list. We'll select the appropriate touch panel for our system. We'll need to change the IP address to 192.168.31.16. Then import the Extron Training GUI Designer file. Click the Browse button and locate the file on our desktop. Verify the hardware, and then click Add to import the GUI Designer layout into GC+. Our touch panel has now been added just beneath our control processor in the top left pane. If the touch panel unit ever needs to be changed from a tabletop to a wall mount or vice versa, we can right-click and switch our touch panel to a different model. We'll keep the panel as is for our configuration. The system settings in the configuration palette now relate to the touch panel and verifies that it's connected to the system. Similar to the processor connection settings that we did earlier, just click the refresh button in Live Hardware Information to populate the fields automatically when the system has verified that the device is connected. User Interfaces is the main area where our basic system configuration will take place. Let's take a look at the tabs. On the Buttons Actions tab, we see the layout that displays the interface and pages associated with the project. This allows us to associate system behavior to specified control objects. In the advanced settings, button groups are created and managed. To add a group, click the plus icon and double-click the new group to rename it. Let's create a group for Power. Now, let's jump back to the Button Actions tab and look at the Available Commands pane and its tabs. In the Devices tab, we can assign specific commands to the button actions of a device. This area shows all the devices we've added and their control ports. The next tab is our I/O ports, where all relays and digital I/Os are located. Here's where we can find control commands for the screen up and screen down relays created earlier. User Interfaces contains options to make any changes to the user interface itself. For example, changing the LCD brightness of the touch panel, navigating between pages and pop-up pages, blinking buttons, and many more. The next tab is System, which gives us the ability to invoke macros, local variables, send emails, incorporate delays, and set up trace messages. To take a look at the available configurable actions, we'll select the Power button. Additional tabs are now available in the Configured Actions pane. The first one is Press, followed by Release, Visual Feedback, and then Text Feedback. In the upper right of the configuration screen is the Properties pane. Notice that if we check Hold Time and Repeat Rate, additional tabs become available in the configured actions for those functions. We'll be discussing these options in more detail during our configuration. For starters, let's create a basic page flip configuration. In this case, we will begin at the Start page and flip it to the Main page. To start, click the Power button. Go to the User Interfaces tab in the Available Commands pane. Scroll to Show Page under Navigation. Drag the letter A over to the Press window of the Configured Actions pane for that Power button. When we bring that command over, we are telling that page what to do when the Start button is pressed. In this case, we want to go from that Start page to the Main page. Now we want to go to the Main page to configure the flip back to the Start page. At the bottom of the Layout window is a drop-down with Start already selected. Expand the drop-down menu to navigate through all the pages, pop-up pages, and modal pop-up pages of the user interface. Select Main. You'll notice that the page changes accordingly. Now we want to make the System Off button go back to the Start page. Click the System Off, and in the User Interfaces tab of the Available Commands window, drag the Show Page action over to the Press window. Set it to the Start page. This is a simplified example of how commands are assigned through the configuration process. As the complexity of the project increases, the software tool, where